Hey, this is Joe Gilder from HomeStudioCorner.com. If you can see closely over my shoulder, you'll see I am this close to being finished mixing my album. And by the time you watch this video, it's probably already sent off for mastering. But as you can see, there are 13 songs over there. Full-length album. Very excited to let you hear it, and that'll be coming soon. But while I was finishing up the mixes this week, I learned something or was reminded of something I wanted to share with you. So my wife and I were riding in the car with our 3 kids, heading to Target to get out of the house. And I wanted to listen to it was the last song on the album that I had done a couple tweaks to that day. Wanted to just hear it in the car, get a different place to listen to it. And as soon as I popped it in and started listening, I was listening to the drums, because I'd messed around with the drum levels. And my wife almost immediately said, that vocal's a little muddy. First of all, it's awesome to have a wife who says things like that. And as I listened, I said, you know what, you're right. And there's a little too much slapback delay on the vocal. So when I got back to the studio this morning to make those final tweaks to that song, I pulled it up. And indeed, I felt like the vocal listening in the studio, it still had a little too much low end, a little too muddy. So I went to the vocal track, and as you would expect, I started messing with the EQ. I had a kind of a low shelf that was already cutting off some of the low end, and I turned that down a little bit more. And I messed with it for a little bit, and it was helping, but it wasn't helping that much, if that makes sense. Eventually, I realized that I was sending the vocal to a delay I had mentioned earlier, and that delay had some EQ on it, but it was a very thick sounding delay, too thick. It was giving the whole mix this muddy feel on the vocal. So I could adjust the vocal till my face turns blue, but it wasn't actually fixing the problem. When I muted the delay and listened to the vocal sounded nice. It sounded clean, crisp. It didn't have a lot of that muddy low mid-range. When I added the delay back in, that's when the muddiness came in. So I did a few EQ adjustments to the delay, and everything was great. So the point here is when you're using EQ, it's really important, and it may sound obvious, but if you've done anything like that, you know, you tend to get so honed in on what you think is the problem that you don't take just a couple seconds to identify what is the real problem that I'm trying to solve. So for me, I was in my mind, the problem was the vocal needs to be less muddy, and it's the vocal track that I need to focus on. And by doing that, I ended up wasting a bunch of time on the vocal track when it was the delay that I needed to adjust. Thankfully, I recognized it pretty quickly, but in a big, dense mix, when there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things going on at once, and you know that this particular track, let's say the snare drum, doesn't sound like you want it to sound, you should make sure it's the snare drum you should be adjusting and not, say, the overhead or the room mic or the tom tracks or the overall EQ on your drum bus. All of those things could be the better place to look other than the individual drum track. So sometimes hitting solo really quickly just to hear if the muddiness you're hearing is in the track itself can be helpful. Otherwise, just try to expand your mind a little bit when you go to EQ something to make sure that you're EQing the right thing. Speaking of EQ, stick around. Next week, I will be making an announcement about a free EQ training. It's going to be awesome. I don't have all the details together. I can't give you any more specifics just yet. But you'll want to be on my mailing list if you want to find out about this completely free, I think it's going to be 3 hours long, training on using EQ. So if you want to be notified about that, you need to sign up to my mailing list over at HomeStudioCorner.com. Give me your email address, and I'll send it out an email probably early next week with details. Okay? Thanks again for watching. I'm Joe from HomeStudioCorner.com. See ya.